Redevelopment Agency. The time is 5 o'clock. The date is June 5th, 2025. Call this meeting to order. Christine, has been a proper notice and quorum present?
Yes, Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Coming down to approval of minutes from the April 17th, 2025 CRA meeting.
I move for approval.
Second.
I have a first and a second. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Holland?
Aye.
Mr. Asbody?
Aye.
Ms. Lee?
Aye.
Vice Chair Ashcraft?
Aye. Second item, CRA item board with discussion, review of CRA development agreement and tax incremental benefits. Tom?
Yeah, so this is related to a redevelopment agreement between the CRA and North Central Place. This is the 5-story apartment building, just a couple of blocks that way. We're in an interesting situation related to the transfer of the property and the status of the taxes. And so we have gotten a request from Mr. DiVinanzo, representing North Central Place, for his annual payment. Because of an ownership change with the property and the status of the taxes, there's some ambiguity between what's happening and the agreement. And so we've asked the attorney to review the agreement. And so Sasha has a brief presentation for you related to the agreement and the circumstances, and then we're looking for some direction on how you want to move forward. So I'll turn it over to Sasha.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the tax benefit issue raised by this agreement and ask for clarification and some guidance going forward. Just generally, these agreements, the framework for it, is to incentivize redevelopment via tax increment reimbursement. And in addition to a few other requirements, the reimbursement is contingent upon the property being improved and, of course, the increase in the tax base. So the board is here today. We're asking for interpretation because it's needed in order to clarify the agreement intent and the terms, to authorize the city to pay the developer based on the taxes received, to avoid precedent risk and prevent inconsistent application. I believe we have 4 additional ones that follow the same format. So we want to make sure that we get that clarification from the board so that that would be applied consistently. After direction is given on this item, a resolution adopting the clarifying items will be brought to the CRA for adoption. That would avoid having to amend each agreement, just memorializing the clarification we get today. And of course, the CRA should consider revisions to subsequent tax increment benefits agreements, and there's a new template and a resolution that will be brought back to you for consideration based on the direction today. Okay, here's the background on this particular agreement. So December 19, 2019, the developer signed an agreement that the developer was North Central Place, and that was signed with the CRA. The developer completed this project relying on future tax increment reimbursement. There were no exemptions to property exemptions or subsidies requested by the developer. That's one of the conditions. The developer sold the property, and the new owner failed to pay the property taxes. Tax certificates were eventually issued and purchased by a third party, resulting in the taxes being paid to the city, and the developer is now seeking reimbursement based on the original agreement. Do we have any questions so far? Now, the important sections here, the relevant sections that the reason we're here today is the reimbursement is tied to incremental property taxes actually received by the CRA. Requisitions require proof of eligible costs paid by developer, and in this instance, it would be the completion of the project, which was close to 1.9 million or so based on what's in the agreement. The developer is prohibited from requesting the property tax exemptions and subsidies, which has not been done. So that's in compliance, and the developer benefits are not transferable without CRA approval. The developer has not transferred those benefits. However, the agreement is silent on who must pay the property taxes and who must own the property in order to trigger reimbursement. So we need guidance on post-sale benefit eligibility because it's silent on that as well. So ownership retention is not a condition right now as far as the requirement in order to receive the benefit. So the key legal and practical issues, we have ambiguity in the payor. Again, the agreement is silent on whether reimbursement is contingent on the developer or subsequent owner paying taxes. We have the developer reliance. The developer relied on the reimbursement to complete this project and retained no ownership in the property but continued rights to claim the benefit. The city did receive the taxes. Of course, it took a little bit, regardless of this particular delinquency. It was a few years. Taxes were eventually received by the CRA through that third party purchasing the tax certificates. The benefit continuation, the developer has not violated any of the exemption conditions. Ownership transfer is not explicitly voiding benefit under the current agreement. And there's a risk exposure. Failure to pay may result in litigation by the developer. The CRA's liability exposure increases absent interpretive clarification, which is why we're here today. As to this agreement, the recommendation to the CRA board is to clarify first the intent and to have that recognized by indicating that the intent of these agreements, whether it is to incentivize redevelopment through reimbursement of taxes that are actually received, not tied to who paid them, authorized payment. So as long as there were no exemptions filed, which there weren't, and the taxes are received, the developer should receive the payment based on remaining eligible for same. And to protect the CRA interests, to clarify that if any future property owner claims exemptions, reimbursement will be voided for that year. Yeah. So that's a great stopping point, actually. This is all I have as to this particular contract before you, and again, this would apply to the other four that we have out there. The next two slides kind of cover comparisons between this one and my recommendations or considerations for a future agreement to avoid these issues going forward. So we're looking for direction on the intent recognition, authorization of payment, and CRA.
So just curious, why didn't the secondary owner pay the taxes? Is it in foreclosure?
I have no idea why they didn't pay the taxes, but
Okay. Just curious.
And then it went to tax deed sales, that would happen?
the property, to my knowledge, has not been sold. It's just tax certificates were redeemed.
Okay.
So the city did get paid
So there's a tax
from
lien
that
on the
exemption.
property.
Correct.
And then the project was initially 1.9 million,
Believe
And
so?
and then,
Yeah, Tom?
and then the property before construction was done sold for 3.5 million? Is that correct?
I don't know what the property sold for, but what the property sold for is outside of the scope of the agreement. The intention is the redevelopment was done based on reliance of this particular benefit for that developer. So that 1.9 was already by the developer. Tom can always.
Yeah,
chime in.
what the agreement said that the developer needed to invest a minimum of 1.9. I believe Mr. DiVinanzo actually invested more than 1.9. I don't know the exact number. But the agreement said he had to invest a minimum of 1.9.
So we don't have any evidence to show any of that, but public record, I
No,
think, should.
he was required to submit receipts to show that he invested that money. That was required as part of the agreement process.
So how much did you get receipts for?
I don't have them in front of me. Al, do you know how much in receipts he?
Al, could you just come up so we can get on the record?
Al Latimer, Economic Development Director. The receipts did total the 1.9 million. He was able to identify $1.9 million worth of receipts.
And then I looked in public records and I saw that the property sold for 3.5 million before construction was even done.
I don't know the sales price. Daniel is here and can answer that question. Is it okay?
I just wanted to get clarification, I don't,
I can answer a lot of questions.
Okay.
I'm sure he's going to want to speak, but again, the agreement itself, the condition was a 1.9, that was satisfied, and finance has all of the documentation for that. So this really just centers around the benefit itself.
Well, if you go a step back, the purpose of the CRA is to incentivize somebody to make a development. And I think Thomas told me, I might be wrong, the line you use, if not for, what's that line you told me? If not for, I wouldn't do it, basically,
The but-for test.
but for test.
And so what that means is the developer has to show us that but for the CRA incentive, the project wouldn't happen.
So the 1.9 wouldn't happen because it was not profitable enough for him unless he got help from the city, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was required to submit some pro forma information showing that, but for the up to 190,000 that the agreement permits over 14 years, but for that investment from the CRA, the project would not have happened.
And it turns out it sold for 3.5, so he's an overperformer.
I think there's a, yes, the CRA incentivizes through its agreement over performance. The CRA wants as much taxable value on the tax rolls as possible. So just looking at the property appraiser's website, the property's valued at about $3.2 million right now.
But that number comes from the last sale. So that's skewed good or bad on the sale as to what it sold for. But he still was incentivized to do the 1.9 and ended up with 3.5.
So so this really comes down to, do we pay the developer that did the building and not the new owners, correct?
Well, the new owners are not a party to the agreement. So the issue here is, again, the conditions as far as completion of the project, satisfaction of the amount, the reliance component, all of that was satisfied before the agreement was entered into, and it was a condition of that. The issue here is that there's no requirement that a specific party to the agreement pay the property taxes. So it's silent on that. So while the property was subsequently sold, and again, that is outside the purview of the agreement itself, it's silent on whether that benefit would somehow be affected. The taxes were paid by a third party at through a tax certificate. Now, the city received payment for the taxes. So because it's silent as to who paid the taxes, that's one of the issues that we're having. And it's also silent as to what kind of obligation would be affected if, let's say, there's a subsidy request or a property tax exemption made by the new owner, because the agreement only says the developer can't do it, the developer hasn't. But what if that were to happen with a future owner? So we want to kind of clarify all of that. This is an agreement between the CRA and the developer, so new property owner is not a part of it. This is not, doesn't run with the land, anything like that. This wasn't transferred. The benefit wasn't transferred. We're just trying to get it clarified so that this doesn't result in inconsistency, since we have 4 other agreements out there, and then clean it up for the next one.
So was there a period of time where the taxes were not paid?
Yes.
Okay, so,
And there was no payment made because the city, again, has to receive actual payment in order for there to be a payout. So once the tax certificate's sold, we received payment, so now there's money for that payout that resulted from the increase in the benefit.
Is there any advantage or disadvantage on who pays the taxes? Do we even care who pays the taxes? No, I don't care. I mean, as long as we get it. Right.
but also the question though has to be, if to me, if they don't pay, the original does not pay and further down the line, this moves on with the others, it seems to me that the original person would be responsible for it, right?
Well, if in this instance, the property was sold, so this went to another
Yeah.
individual. Had this been
So does this
kept,
move with them when they sell it?
it does not. It requires CRA approval. So if the developer would have retained the property, of course, they're responsible for payment of the property taxes. Otherwise, they're subject to a tax deed sale and possible foreclosure action and things like that. But that's not what happened here. The property was sold, but the taxes were paid even though delinquent, they were paid and we received them. But again, this agreement is between the CRA and the developer.
Going back to Vice Mayor Ashcraft's question as to, I don't want to be flippant, but do we care who pays the taxes? The purpose of the redevelopment agreement is to incentivize private investment in the CRA to get a redevelopment project and value on the tax rolls. And that has happened through this agreement has incentivized private investment and a project on the tax rolls. Again, I don't want to be flippant, but the CRA has accomplished what it set out to do with the redevelopment agreement. I don't want to say we don't care who pays the taxes, but in effect, the CRA has gotten what it wanted through its investment.
Sasha, did the developer follow, or did they live up to the letter of the agreement with the CRA board?
I believe that that's the case. I mean, Tom and Al can speak to that.
That's all I need to know.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Same here.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So in essence, if it was done and paid, then whatever agreement we had with him was completed? Because once they paid it?
Well, that's why, because of the lack of clarity on that payment component, that's why we're here. But yes, the project was completed, and for the first, I think it was 2 years that there were delinquent taxes, there was no request for payment because there was nothing to pay out. Now there is. So it's why we're here. We want to get clarification as to if there is, and again, looking just prospectively as to the revisions to the subsequent agreement. If you restrict it to the property owner at the time of the agreement being responsible for payment of the taxes, then you run into issues as far as sale of property, right? So now you're interfering with someone's rights to do what they wish with their property. So we look at other aspects. Okay, if they're going to embark on this journey, then, and we want to just make sure that the property taxes are paid, and then if they want to transfer it, we look at whether it requires approval for the CRA, or if it's going to end the contract between the CRA and that particular property owner, et cetera. So they're a little, it's more complicated than just saying that the owner has to be the one to pay the taxes if they eventually do sell the property. Because at the inception of this, the investment was made and completed. So there are certain options to consider, but we want to first take care of what we have before us and those 4 other contracts that are out there before we look at subsequent options.
At the end of the day, our agreement was written poorly. There was not enough put into the agreement to protect everything. From here going forward, it looks like Sasha has on the next couple slides for a way for us to protect ourselves and the CRA going forward.
So you're saying like honor what we have now, but then we've got to fix the problem?
Yep.
He fulfilled the letter of the law, of the agreement that we had with him.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we didn't write a good enough agreement to add other protections in there. So, yes.
So it's on us to make it better after
And
this.
something that we all need to remember in the back of our minds, we won this year in the state legislature, but next year they're coming after the CRAs again, and we will lose that battle, I believe. So the CRAs are going away, and we're gonna have to really watch what we're doing with CRAs
Exactly.
going forward.
If I may, the main ambiguities are, the agreement says that the developer cannot apply for tax exempt status. He has not done that, but what the agreement doesn't say is if it's sold, what happens if the new owner applies for tax exempt status? And frankly, Mr. DiVincenzo has exposed himself a little bit because he has sold the property and now he has lost control of who is someone going to apply for tax exempt status. If someone buys it and applies for tax exempt status, they haven't violated the agreement, but they have set up a situation where he doesn't get paid because no one's paying taxes. And then the other ambiguity is it also says that they can't, the developer cannot challenge the appraiser's value of the property. And again, he has not done that, but if a new buyer isn't happy with the assessment and challenges the assessment, Mr. DiVincenzo would suffer because he would not get the payments that the agreement had coming to him. So I think we've worked on some language that's gonna clarify some of those ambiguities moving forward.
Sasha, are you wanting a motion to clarify this first, and then you present something different? Or
Yeah, so I want to handle this
rectify it?
aspect first, yes. I want to make sure that we go through these three components, just recognizing what the intent was of the agreement. Now, everything Tom said is exactly correct. Again, if we don't receive an increase in tax value, then there's really no payout. So I do believe that the spirit of it is there. Another aspect I want to deal with subsequent to this agreement is going to be that delinquency component. So how long are we going to allow the delinquency to go for before you cannot claim a benefit, right, with the CRA? And if are we going to look at possible just, disqualification components? That's one of the recommendations I have there. If it's, let's say, 2 years of two tax years, right? You give it up the first year if you don't pay, but then if it continues, or if it's 1 year on, 1 year off kind of thing, the second year that you have two delinquencies, then at that point you don't qualify. That way we can kind of keep the coffers there because that's the intent of the CRA too. So, but that's subsequent to this one. I mean, I can't tie the two, but these are other matters to consider just going forward to make it clear for everybody involved.
Well, I mean, but are we able to restrict a new owner from not filing tax exempt status? We can't do that, can we?
No, but that's why we want to make sure that we're not tying who pays the taxes to the agreement while also not binding the CRA to a situation where, yes, the developer, who's no longer the owner, hasn't violated it in this spirit, but the new owner did decrease the property taxes by doing such things as applying for a subsidy or tax exempt status.
Okay.
So we would just want to make it clear that.
Yeah.
If Mr. DiVincenzo had assigned this agreement to the buyer, then they would be subject to it. But that didn't happen, and so they are not subject. So the answer to your question is, no, we can't make the buyer do anything because they're not party to this agreement. But if,
Well, and you can't assign it without CRA approval. That's in
But
there
is-
as
but
well,
is that-
so.
Okay, that actually is a really good question. Can we make that a requirement that we have to assign the agreement to a new owner?
Or
That
that you
can
don't
be.
get paid if you
Right.
don't sign it.
Right.
But that we could look at that prospectively. So again, I want to first deal with the current situation and those 4 agreements that we have out there. What would ensue from that is if we, if the motion is to basically reiterate that this is the intent and we want to authorize the city to make that payment, I will prepare a resolution for you that will embody everything we talked about, and that would just be applicable to this agreement and those 4 that we have out there. And then the next thing we'll do is look at those components
Okay. All right.
by
So
comparison.
So we do need a motion
I
to
make a
adopt.
How much would we be paying out?
1.9.
No,
well, it's 1.9 over 14 years. It's a maximum of 22,500 per year
Per year.
is the maximum.
I think we need to clarify too, that if somebody sells the property, by default, it either goes away or it goes to the new owner, because the purpose of it is to help subsidize the years coming ahead, because it's gonna be a struggle. Just like if someone opened up today and built a new building, it's gonna be a struggle until they get up to full strength, and I think that's the purpose of the CRA. But if you don't own the property anymore, then the benefit should go to whoever owns it now, so that we could keep them above water. Maybe they would have been able to pay their taxes. So.
And
I
that's
think
something
we
to
need-
consider,
Yeah,
yes,
so I think we
going
have to-
forward.
That needs to go with the property, because we are part of the property in the sense that it's in our municipality. So we wanna see the property thrive, not the seller. The seller can make a compensation or adjustment for that in determining the value of what they sell it.
Okay.
Where if, in this case, he thought his property was worth 3.5 and he was gonna give up his 190 grand, in essence, you would make the argument that it's really worth 3.69, because they're gonna get it one or another way. And actually, he'd work out better because he'd get paid ahead. But the incentive needs to be to the person who owns the property, in my opinion,
Well,
and who's in the boat with us?
so that's something to look into as far as the next agreement, and it's part of what we're going to talk about, whether we want this agreement to essentially run with the land, which is not what's happening currently, but that will be for the subsequent agreement.
But what we do on this case today has to carry to those 4?
It would be this current one, and we have 4 others that have the same language, the exact same agreement. So just for consistency, we want to make sure that's why I want to do it this way, as far as just a resolution codifying what the intent is, so that if this were to come up with one of the other contracts we have out there, then we know exactly what
Has
to
any
do.
of the other 4, if there's 4, have they sold and they're no longer with the same?
I believe they
owner?
still own the property. Yeah, this
This
is
is the only
and it's
sale.
quite unique. I mean, as far as what transpired. I mean, generally people pay their property taxes, so it's we wouldn't be here today had it not been for
And
the
are
fact
the other
that
4 transactions, any of those other 4 owned by the same,
Actually, it's a total of 4.
all owned by the same applicant?
No, 2 are owned by the same applicant.
So his case, he owns 3 of them. So 3 of the 4 are owned by the same developer petitioning for today's payment of that 19,000.
The Metellas, townhome project on Orange Avenue, and then, the 3-story owned by Bill Bucalis, but I think they're,
I think we heard the applicant say that he's involved in 3 of them. I don't know if you accept that, or you're,
he is involved in 3. He's got
That's not why
the former service station across the street,
I know, that's not why we're here.
the 5-story, and then the waterfront grill.
we just
are
want to
the
know the
3.
impact of it.
I know. All right, so what kind of motion do we
Mr.
need?
Chair, I make a motion that we find that the developer followed the letter of the law, or the letter of the agreement that we made with him, but the CRA board would like to look at new ways of doing things moving forward.
I'll second it.
by identifying it.
And we will make payment on this.
Okay.
I got a first and a second. Any further discussion? No? Roll call, please.
Is that what you were looking for
Yes.
to do?
Any further? George, you good?
No, sir.
All right, roll call, please.
Mr. Holland?
Aye.
Mr. Asbody?
No?
Ms. Lee?
Aye.
Vice Chair Ashcraft?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
May I address the board since the vote's over?
I mean,
That would be up to the
You got what
chair.
you wanted, Danny. You got what you wanted.
I know, but I think there's some things said that should be clarified so you all can have a bigger picture.
Are you okay with that or not? Everybody?
I have a card from Mr. DiVinanzo to speak.
Oh, sorry. Is it public?
It was a discussion among the board, but if you would like to hear from him, it's already been decided.
To you, as
It's
Mr. Chairman.
fine.
Okay,
next
Dan-
thing we'll do
Daniel,
is go through
you
the
got 5
agreement.
minutes.
5 minutes.
Or
Three.
3, I'm sorry,
Three.
3 minutes. Sorry, 3 minutes. 3 minutes. I know, sorry. 3.
Okay, so what happened is I started this building before COVID, and the rents were significantly less when we started the process. Somebody drove up and wanted to buy the building while I was in process. And by the way, I spent $2.5 million. Okay, we spent $250,000 in upfront paper costs before we broke ground. So what happens is, if you want to say it was a windfall per se, if you'll all remember, rents skyrocketed. So the buyer that came up to us, I didn't want to sell, but I have a business partner, and he's like, we need to sell. So we sold the building, and just so you all know, you're collecting $65,000 a year in property taxes, and if it stays at the current value, you're going to collect over $1.3 million, actually $1.4 million through the course of the CRA, and I'm going to get $190,000. So incentivized, it's there. Also, the developer, you talk about you don't want to transfer that if the property sells, you don't want this to go forward. Guess what? The buyer did not have the risk up front of providing the funding to do a multi-million-dollar project that took over 2 years because of COVID. The buyer, the end buyer, did not have to do any of the groundwork and paperwork, the upfront costs, $250,000 outlay. So it would really be penalizing. And when you say, well, just throw that $190 on the end to the end buyer, it can actually change how a deal transpires. Also, So I understand if a new buyer decided to go, say a church bought the building and they want tax exempt status because they're going to make it a halfway house or something, right? What happens is I certainly understand that it will terminate the CRA funding that I'll receive. I get that. That's a risk you play. I want you to know what's going on with the building. It was not one buyer. It was a group of 5 buyers. 2 of them are significant. 3 of them are weak. They were going into foreclosure. I contacted the bank. Me and my partner are prepared to buy the building back. We're going to wait for it to go to auction, but it's not going to go to auction. You know why? Because the 2 strong players, they're pushing the other 3 out. That's exactly what's happening. And then they're going to butt heads. So now you talked about, okay, let's say after 2 years, we go ahead and nullify the CRA agreement because they haven't paid. Those tax bills are sold at auction. George, you know that. Everyone else knows that. They're sold at auction. You're going to get that money regardless of they're paid or back. And they get to go 3 years, and then it hits the auction block unless the owner at the 11th hour comes up and pays everybody off. So you're still getting your incremental value there. So it really is, and the reason I say this is because, you know, as crazy as I am, I'm planning to do like 4 more buildings downtown. And I'm going to be coming back to the CRA. And believe it or not, the money is valuable. And I'm not planning, unless the buyer is significant and wants to actually pay to finance me getting the whole amount up front, which they're not going to want to do. I'm not going to want to transfer those funds. I understand what the attorney said, that if the buyer were to make it go tax exempt, it would nullify the agreement. That's fair. I totally get that. These people are not going to let that building go into to a tax exempt status. And if it goes for auction, like I said, we're going to be right there. So I fulfilled the agreement. I spent more than I was supposed to. The building, so just so you know, that's a 21,000 square foot building. I built it for less than $125 a square foot. That is an unachievable dollar amount by anyone. That building will never be worth less than $2.5 million. Never in wildest dreams. When we built that building, we anticipated rents from right around $1,200 to like $1,350 a month. They went in at $1,800 a month. And I know I got to go, but the thing is, so this is, I appreciate that I got the vote. I'm sorry, Mr. Asbody, that you didn't see it.
Oh, I can't.
But
No, I don't have a problem with what you said. I agree with that incentive was there and that the city is becoming whole. Where I'm addressing, if I didn't make it clear, is who should be benefiting from that incentive as it goes down the line. Because my understanding is the benefit of the CRA is to help someone carry through a tough time. So where you were fortunate enough to go through what you did, and we're grateful that you invested in the community, I'm just trying to see, looking forward ahead, the incentive, and it might be something too, depending on what it is sold for. We want to help the people who are in there, and it's clearly they're in trouble because they need help. So
well, they've totally
there's no
mismanaged
question as to what you did was within.
I took the
those.
risk. I took the personal
You took-
risk.
Sure, there's always risk in.
Yes, and just so you know, do you all know who managed that
So
building?
so
Do you
when
know
you
who
say-
managed that fiasco there?
When you
HR,
say I
right?
didn't see it, I think that's a bad
Yeah.
choice of words.
Okay, I apologize.
No problem.
Okay,
I
thanks,
apologize.
Okay,
Daniel.
great, thank you.
Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel.
All right, so let's, are we ready to take a look at a few options for a new agreement? Back up, okay. All right. So we'll first look at these 4, and then there's 4 on the other page. So the first one is the responsibility for paying taxes. So right now, the agreement we just looked at is silent on that. It only requires that we receive the incremental tax. The option here, if we wanted to have this, we just talked about maybe not doing that, but explicitly requiring the developer to pay taxes timely and in full prior to delinquency. Otherwise, the reimbursement is forfeited if not paid on time. So you can consider perhaps not requiring the developer, but ensuring that the property taxes on the property are paid. Again, this agreement right now is structured between developer and the CRA.
I don't think we can, are we gonna talk individually, or you wanna go through the whole thing? You wanna talk on each subject?
Let me just go through it because that way we can kind of encompass, some of these are going to tie together. The other component, eligibility post-sale. So right now it does not require ownership retention to receive the reimbursement benefit. My suggestion is to require that the CRA approve that the benefit continue if the property is sold, you would actually have to get express approval. If you sell the property without approval from the CRA, then the agreement would terminate. That's a way to ensure that the CRA remains involved, but at the same time, allows you to consider the circumstances of the developer, possibly the market, new buyer, and not necessarily tie it to the land. And just kind of, it still remains a personal agreement, but it will require involvement from the CRA if the property were to be sold. The exemptions affecting reimbursement, right now, it just says the developer may not apply. We just covered that, silent on future owners. We can expand that restriction for any exemption or any kind of tax abatement as well that would disqualify reimbursement for that year. Again, we're just looking at it if it were the developer. Reimbursement triggers. This current agreement, it's triggered if we receive the incremental property tax payment, and then the recommendation would be that the payment be conditional on proof that the taxes were paid that year. Again, it could be by developer, and that we have receipt of that. So it wouldn't be an automatic trigger just because the project was completed or anything like that. There would have to be a yearly application with proof of payment. The other components, default conditions. So right now there's no forfeiture clause in there for tax delinquency. The termination, there's a termination notice for default and failure to cure. In this instance that we just looked at, it wouldn't apply because, again, the property was transferred, so we can't require someone to do something that on some property that they don't own. But this could be cleared up by making it an automatic forfeiture if reimbursement of taxes is not paid within, well, the year of that it was actually paid, and if there's a delinquency of two or more years, then the agreement is terminated by default. That's a way to eliminate continuous payments. Let's say, these every 3 years the property is redeemed, and then you're making these large payments out. That's just something to consider. The assignment or transferability, again, the current agreement says that the benefits are not transferable without approval, and that has been the case, but this one will only allow assignment of the benefit with the consent of the CRA. And it does allow, and if you wanted to consider whether financing could be a component for that particular property, and they wanted to kind of have that benefit, just kind of like a guarantee-ish, if they want to go ahead and build out, then we can look at an assignment section that provides certain provisions for financing. Then the interpretation and risk, of course, we just talked about that. We want to make sure that there are no ambiguous provisions, so we could eliminate having to come back, and just make sure we have just clear definitions for reimbursement prerequisites, and that our liability is explicitly limited. And the project use, right now it doesn't have, the agreement doesn't state what use the property needs to have. It would be a recommendation that it requires that the continuous use of the property remain, whether it was a residential purpose, whether it was commercial, throughout the period of reimbursement, whatever period that is. Because if you're investing it to develop, let's say residential, you don't want that torn down and then you have commercial, but the project was done. So these are just kind of some options for you guys to discuss and give me some feedback. I'll go back to the first page.
So, no one's talking, so I guess I'll start talking.
I'm thinking.
Okay.
It's a lot to consider.
It is a lot, actually, you're right.
And I think, for me, it's like, where do we start? And where do we start is like, what is the purpose of giving the tax breaks?
That's.
What is that purpose? Is it just development? Is that the purpose? Or is it something else?
I think it's twofold there. I think you're right. It is for development, because if it isn't for development, you don't have taxes, so that trips that. I think it's for development, and then for the carrying through a period. The question comes up for me is who benefits from the help that the city's giving back to incentivize these people to go on? Because when you help reduce the cost of of development, you help the existing owner. You don't help the new guy who pays the up step in it. And that puts us and the property in more jeopardy, which is where it is now. So I think the benefit should continue to whoever owns the property at that time. And I think we disclose that to them. Now, they can have it assigned. They can agree to get it assigned through us, through the board ahead of time, or they can work with the seller and say, you do not get that, we're taking that back. They can do that in the private sector.
I agree with you on that, but I also kind of agree with Daniel's point. If it wasn't for that, then the thing wouldn't have gotten developed to begin with. So, you know, who's taking the more risk by developing the building, or and do we give that benefit to the person that really didn't have the funding to have it built to begin with? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So I thought a step in that process would be if the property sold for greater than what its value was, where there was a step up, then there wouldn't be. If it sells for less, then yes, it should probably stay with the original owner,
Well, there's another option.
because that's the person who's hurt. But I think there's a lot of stuff
Yeah,
here.
there's a
that's-
lot of stuff in here.
I don't know that-
Digest all in one time.
I don't know that we can knock this out in
No.
15 minutes.
Can
yeah.
you send this to us and let us take a
Yeah.
look at it and
I'd
study
rather
over it? There's a
table it and
lot.
wait.
And we have a workshop coming here or there, maybe we can take an extra 30 minutes out of it by then and address it.
I don't know when the
Do
next.
you have any recommendations?
I think everything in here, with the exception of the tying the taxes to the developer per se, but requiring proof of payment of the taxes, and then, you know, limiting that exposure as far as delinquency. Having it come back to the CRA, whether the property is sold or if there needs to be an assignment, gives you the control that you're looking for to determine whether you want it to continue to be enforceable with the current party, or if you want it to have it go over to the new party. So that really gives you the control that you're looking for there.
And an option would be if they don't come and apply to move on.
That's
then
a
they def-
condition,
then
right?
then
It would
it's-
automatically terminate, right?
Yeah. So,
So
yeah,
there's a lot of steps here.
Yeah, there's.
We're not
we
attorneys.
need
to-
I need a flow chart to figure this out. So, I mean, I agree with Michael. Does everyone else agree that we just need to have this sent to us and look at it and see? And then we can reconvene and.
Because when you look at this, you see
There's-
something in almost everything that
Yeah,
could be in it.
there's a lot of
and-
options.
A lot of
Yeah.
steps, a lot of
Okay.
what it's.
Well, if it helps, I mean, I can, I have a sense of where you guys are wanting to go as far as really just kind of having that CRA component in the sale process, assignment process, and things like that, and not necessarily who pays the taxes per se, because it could be, and here's just a situation, the taxes may be paid by, let's say that particular person is having a hard time, but it's paid by their aunt or paid by a friend, and they took out, the receipt itself is gonna show another name, however, taxes were paid. And that's just something that they have to work out with somebody else, right? So, it would make sense not to necessarily restrict it, but keep you involved in the event that this agreement does have to be assigned. So,
Because if he does do, in the case of his case, if he did have them assign it, or didn't assign it and he kept it, and we allowed that, and they don't pay their taxes, he shouldn't be hurt for that. So,
and there's also, it could be a condition of that particular sale, because this is very contingent on market situation, and we don't want to get into that,
I
but,
guess we're gonna come back to it.
so what
Well,
I'll do is go ahead.
I was gonna say one last thing, and let's not forget about a tax certificate sale for deed. We need to make sure that's clarified too. And if you hold on to a tax certificate with so many years, you get to apply for a tax deed, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
That's why we're looking at 2+, so no more than 2 years delinquency. That's why I was trying to cut it off before it
Right.
would go to tax deed sale.
Perfect, okay, thank you, okay.
So that's.
And then
that's
if
what was
at
in
the
there.
tax deed sale, consider this, because Daniel talked about that, if he buys, the original guy buys it back at the tax deed sale, he probably should get the benefit continuing. So it's a lot of curves, there's a lot of turns.
Yeah.
So you're saying it would end, if it ends and he takes it out of, in this case, takes it out of distress, should he be entitled to that, restart that? I mean, I think he should, but, so there's a lot of moving parts, but
Well, the other thing I was listening to, when he says it seems like he took the risk initially to put his monies into it to build it. And then if he sells it, the risk was on him, not on the person who just bought it. So how do you remedy that?
Well, again, if it goes back to the original person, I was just thinking about the scenario that Commissioner Asbody was discussing. He would redeem the tax certificates. That would be a way to protect your position, and you're the one that's going to push it through to tax deed sales. So that could be a condition that can be added in addition to that. But I think that preparing something, I do have a draft already in the works, just kind of comprising most of this and giving you that touch point before anything happens with the property, and including just payment of the taxes and proof of that for now would be a pretty good place to start. That way I don't bombard you with all this extra stuff.
Okay. Anything else?
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
All right, we're adjourned until the city commission meeting at 6 o'clock.